I like to call Holly Ransom to the stage, take the podium, and give us a nice speech on why change is not a dirty word. So Holly is CEO of Emergent, one of Australian Financial Review's 100 most influential Australian women, Young Western Australian of the Year, Young Volunteer of the Year, and it goes on. Chairperson of the G20 Youth Summit, co-chair of the UN's Global Coalition of Young Women entrepreneurs, and the youngest ever female director of an Australian football league club. That's Port Adelaide Football Club. That is quite an achievement, Holly. Really looking forward to what you have to say. Please come and take the podium.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. What shoes to fill after Brian. Brian, that's truly one of the best conference opening presentations I think I've seen. And I'm in awe of the music knowledge that's in this room. The pace of reaction is like the Google search speed time. That was extraordinary. I've never seen hands go up that fast. So well done, everyone. And look, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here today because I'm personally so grateful to the community broadcast sector for all the support that they've provided me and the various causes that I've worked on over the years with, in terms of trying to reach the community, talk to them about key social issues. Particular shout out, I'm originally a West Aussie, RTR-FM and all the community radio stations in the West. Thank you so much for what you did in the early days of the work I was doing over there. And I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you about really picking up on this conversation, acknowledging the incredible work that you're doing and the incredible contribution that's been made through the community broadcasting sector across this country, and absolutely taking as a given the inherent value and the extraordinary role that you do play and we need you to continue to play. And wanting this morning to look at what are the trends that we're seeing going on in the world that we need to be alive to as leaders in this sector, as people who are looking to ensure that we move in line with our community and continue to meet and deliver for our community. What is it that we need to be thinking about and preparing to respond to? And how is it that we can start, adding some tools to our toolkit on how it is that we can go about doing that? And really what I wanted to kick off with today is one of my favourite quotes of all time, largely because I truly can't believe anyone ever let it out of the bag. And hopefully this is going to click through at Kale's end. I think my presentation should be coming up. Oh no, we're a step off. Cool. Thanks, Kale. Will this work as the clicker? Beautiful. Cool. Yeah, this is where we start. Brilliant. Everything that could have been invented has been invented. And if you check out the year on this was 1898. That the chief global body, effectively, of ideas, the US Patent Office, came out and effectively said, everyone put down your tools, let's go to the pub, humankind's peaked. Like, that's what that line is, right? And it seems extraordinary to think that we said that in 1898 when you think about the transformation and change that's happened in the last 12 months of your professional or personal lives. The pace of change that we're seeing, it's incredible to think that came out. But I think it's an example of how all too easy it is when we're doing a really good job of things to forget that we need to continue to ask questions, to try new things, to evolve and grow and push and stretch in order that we can continue to keep doing great things. And what I want to think about today is, well, what's our baseline? And particularly baseline relative to some of the things we're going to talk about as being very apparent trends in 2016, but ones that we know are going to continue to have enormous impact over the landscape of our community in the next 10 years. And this might apply to you from the point of view of how do we think about getting diversity in or different forms of sponsorship in to support our station's work. This might apply to you in thinking about how do we continue to grow our audience and listenership across the country. Whatever it might be, what we're thinking of is really this scale that I would look at in terms of our member engagement. And it's not that we're saying that there's any of these categories aren't valuable. We need all of these three categories when we think about the life of a station. We absolutely need our passive members who just love tuning in and listening. At the same time, we need our active members, people who are calling up and engaging and wanting to interact and be a part of the programming and the shows. And finally, we need to think about our partners. Who are the people who are actually getting in, the incredible army of people who run our stations, the incredible army of business people, corporations, governments across the country who support in all different ways. And what I want us to think about with our baseline today is how are we going across all of those three categories? And as we talk about the trends, where are the areas where you go, geez, there's an opportunity for us to do a little bit more there? How could we think about the application of some of this to where we are right now and to improving us a little bit in this particular segment of our engaged membership base? So this is what I wanted to put up first, and I wanted to give you as best of impression as I can of the baseline of radio engagement across the generations. Because one of the things I want to look at today is this generational shift, because it is going to transform our communities over the course of the next 10 years. The best data that we can get on it comes out of the United States. This is Nielsen data, and this is looking at the breakdown of usership of radio or listenership of radio across the generations. So you can see some really encouraging statistics, because I think there's a lot of talk out there, and I'd be interested in the views across the room, that says, oh, radio's dead with this younger generation. Not so. You know, the numbers that we're seeing, they're enormous listeners, they're enormous consumers of audio-type media. But there are ways that this is dramatically changing that we need to be alive to and thinking about. So when you look at it, not the same number of hours as the boomer generation, but certainly a huge reach across the audience base. This is just another look at the breakdown. This is public radio specifically. So wanting to take a look away from the idea, because remembering a lot of that statistic up front is going to be more of those digital commercial type radio offerings. This is looking at the public radio breakdown. Again, across the US. Would love to see this accessible data across Australia, but it seems we've got a little bit of a lack of measurement of some of these sorts of things comparatively. And this is looking over the course of the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. Cool. So this is what I wanted to say as our baseline of kind of just giving us a sense of who's listening, who's engaging, and also putting some fact and a hard base to some of the conversation or the swirling misinformation that might be going around who's listening to radio and who's not. So what does this all mean? Well, one of the things I think is really extraordinary when we think about change and transformation is that if we push pause on the planet right now, 50% of the world's population are under the age of 30. This is the largest generation of young people we've ever seen. And it's interesting with an Australian lens on it too, because we talk a lot about the ageing population. And it's a really important conversation that we're having. But there's two lenses we need to be having that conversation with. Because in 2012, we had 5 Australians in the workforce for every Australian over the age of 65. If we fast forward just 20 years, so to 2032, that number's going to halve. It'll be 2.5 Australians in the workforce for every Australian over the age of 65. So one of the big things that we're going to see in the terms of the makeup of our workforce is that by 2025, so within the decade, 75% of the Australian workforce will be millennial, because of the transitioning out of the boomer generation and the occupancy of that younger generation in the workforce predominantly. And so it's interesting for us to start thinking about what do we expect that will change in the makeup of our communities, in the structuring of who's able to volunteer, of who's in our paid employed workforce. How will that shift and change? One of the other things I think is interesting when we talk about this generational difference is I feel like we can overcook it a little bit. We can put millennials at one end of the spectrum and put baby boomers at the other end, and we can make them look like they're alien life forms to one another, right? Whereas realistically, all we're doing is changing this slightly. If we're adapting Maslow's hierarchy, that idea that baseline level we all need, food, water, shelter, then we can go up for there. All we're doing is this, right? That's the only thing that changes when we talk about a millennial generation. And you laugh because you're either in the office or at home the day the Wi-Fi went down. It wasn't worth living, was it? But look, there's a little bit of truth to this in terms of changing wants and needs. And what I want to look at it from the point of view of is how it's changed engagement. And this is a really important one for us to be thinking about. Does anyone know what happened in 2005 and 2013? Yes, someone got it. 2 popes came in. This is a photo taken at Vatican City at the same point across that 8-year span. I mean, it could be an iPhone ad. In 2005 there, you can barely see a device. In 2013, you can barely see anyone that's physically present, right? All there via device. I don't know if you've had that horrible experience of going to a concert behind someone who's waving their iPad the whole time instead of actually being there. But it speaks to a transformation we've got in how people are engaging with our content, how people are engaging with content at large. And that has ramifications for us as leaders. I had this conversation with Professor Harper. Some of you might know him. He runs the Competition Policy Law Review for Australia. And I keynoted his conference, and I sat next to him at dinner, and He was talking about the 650 submissions he'd had into the competition policy law review. I thought, wow, in the age of Uber and Spotify and Airbnb, I'd be so intrigued to hear what young people are telling you about competition. And he said, well, I haven't spoken to any young people. I was like, right, give me strength. Why haven't we spoken to any young people? He said, well, I put the ads for our public forum in the Australian Financial Review and no young people showed up. Uncanny, right? But part of what's interesting is that we know engagement is shifting, and I can empathise with what was at the heart of Professor Harper's point there, was that I don't feel like I should have to change the way that I go about engaging in order to fit this generation. And why should it be any different to what I do to engage my own? And I think, as we're probably alive to, we can will, wish and want that to be the case. But we're actually making it a far harder task for ourselves if we're exerting all our effort and energy in trying to shift eyeballs to where we want them to be, than we are to think about where do we know that they're going and how do we access them there. One of the big things that I found interesting in preparation for this conference, reading about millennials and understanding the shift that they've got in their engagement with radio, is that smartphones are responsible for 41% of their radio use. So they're getting it pretty well, almost increasingly exclusively on their devices. The growth rate year on year in that is massive. 51% of that, so just over half of what they're using their phones to access, is direct on-demand radio streaming. So they're two obvious trends that we know that are shifting engagement in this space. And so thinking about the degree to which we start dabbling in that, catering to that, either collectively or as individual stations, is really, really important when we think about this new group and where it is that they want to get their radio and how it is they want to get it. This is one here that just looks at the breakdown of the listening locations, and we can see in-home versus mobile. And I think that gives us a good indication when you're looking at the two younger generations, millennials and Generation X, increasingly dominant. Interestingly, alongside, this is American again, Hispanics, increasingly on device, increasingly not in-home listening. So again, important for us to be thinking about how is it that we're catering to that, and just generationally how it is that that is shifting. Cool. And this is an example, I guess, of increasingly how actually we're designing features, or they're adapting for our cars and the mobility of our lives in order that these services can actually be inputted and accessed in a way that they couldn't previously. Cool. So one of the things I quickly want to look at when it comes to this is, let's look at engagement and the pace of change and the environment we're actually having to lead and work in. And I'm encouraged by Brian's session because I know I'm not going to need any help getting audience participation for this. But what I want to do is look at this metric called the 50 million metric, which is how quickly could something start up and engage an audience or user base of 50 million people. So we're going to start with an old classic, the telephone, the original telephone. How long do we think it took the telephone to reach 50 million people? Any guesses? Just yell it out. 60 years is a pretty good guess. Bit higher? What do we got? Yeah, 75. Well done, sir. Next one, TV. Gotten a fair bit quicker by the time the television came along. What do we reckon? 35 years for halving? 13. So if we think about this generationally, this is giving us a sense of the pace of change that we're engaging with in almost a digital media and an entertainment media type environment. Now we get interesting. How long do you think it took Facebook to reach 50 million people? We're heading in this south direction, absolutely. 18 months. Now, I know we haven't known each other for very long, but I feel like we're all friends here, so there's absolutely no shame in admitting this, right? Who plays Angry Birds? Oh, no hands. All right, we're striking out with this audience. This is an Android and iPhone game for anyone that wasn't sure what it was. How long do we think it took them to reach 50 million? 6 months? Any other guesses? 35 days. Now, this next one was the winner up until a dark horse in 2016 kind of took the pack. Candy Crush, which had a whopping 500 million users that it surpassed in December last year. How long do you think it took them to get to 50 million? 2 days. We're getting that direction, right? 18 days. And finally, I feel like we have a drum roll for this one. We know what's coming, don't we? What do we got? Pokemon Go, that's right. Can I point out the only one of this list where people have died in the act of engaging, right? Everything else, fairly safe. This one, people have been so desperate to catch Pokemon, they've run out in front of traffic. It's terrible, but it's true. How long do we think it took them to reach 50 million? 8 days. Well within the month, they got to more than 100 million, and more than 20 million people actively play every day. So you almost have the Australian population playing Pokemon Go every day. Now, there's a couple of reasons I want to put this up there. One, because I think it gives us an incredible illustration intergenerationally of the pace of change. How easily now people can be voting with their feet, with their thumbs, whatever way you want to look at it. And also the increasing expectation that flows from that. Because what's interesting, because our lives are so interconnected, the pace that we have, that digital experience, if we've got that in one aspect of our lives, it flows and becomes our expectation of the way that we want to engage in all others. So this general pace of change has enormous ramifications for everyone who's thinking about what does my audience, what does my consumer, what does my community expect? Because this is increasingly how they're engaging through their smartphones with all sorts of service providers, with all sorts of organisations that are involved in them going about their daily business. So what does it mean? I don't have a short attention span. You've got a short interesting span. And look, it's funny because it's actually true. If we look at and track attention spans over the last decade, they've shrunk from 12 minutes to 4 minutes, which is scary. And that's after we've given an initial kind of 7 to 8 second window where we sort of judge a book by its cover and work out whether to give it the 4 minutes. So it's important for us to be thinking about that as our engagement window. And I don't necessarily mean having to confine program length to 4 minutes. But I mean that you have a 4-minute window up front to position your message and your content in a way that's going to get that buy-in for the extended listening. That's going to get the buy-in for general interest and engagement and go, yeah, I'm going to sit down and take some time to listen to that. One of the final things I wanted to talk about that's really fascinating when we think about how it is that we go about communicating, and I get excited about this for community radio because you're so positioned to leverage this and take extraordinary advantage of it. And hearing this morning about the unbelievable success of your Twitter campaign recently and 1 million people engaging in that is proof of it, is how dramatically trust is shifting and that kind of social word of mouth. When we look at the trend, and part of why we watch millennials is because we expect about an 18-month lag time before Generation X will follow, and so on. So it's not just that this generation are the largest in our workforce already and will be very substantially 3/4 of it by 2025. It's that we expect them to trend lead when it comes to engagement trends. And so we want to watch them because we're alive to the fact our community is probably going to follow them at large. And one of the things we've seen is that 1% of this generation trust advertising. Probably not that surprising. You know, they've seen about 12,000 advertising messages a day since they were that big. Interestingly, 32% of them trust blogs. You've seen companies start to pick up on this a lot. Emirates did this the other day. They gave a free ticket to a popular US blogger, $64,000 ticket on a first-class suite, on the proviso that should he enjoy himself, perhaps he could blog about it. He did a 4-minute video, which included him ordering the caviar just to find out what caviar was, and posted it online, and within 24 hours, they had 2 million hits. It's an example of how businesses are starting to think differently about where they position their dollars and spend. The thing I think is particularly interesting and relevant is that 83% of this generation looking for some kind of peer-to-peer referencing site, scoreboard, review system to inform their decision making, to give them a sense of what they should listen to, what's worth investing their time, talent, effort, energy in. And interestingly, 57% of them won't engage if there's a negative review. So not only is there this really powerful positive phenomenon, it's like social has taken word of mouth and put it on steroids, right? We've always known that word of mouth is powerful, but now that world's taken it to a whole new level. But there's also this piece around making sure that we're cultivating that positively and we're alive to our social presence online and making sure that there's not any negativity that's blocking engagement unnecessarily. So what does it all mean for us? Well, as Einstein, I think, probably said it more succinctly than most, the definition of insanity is thinking that we can do the same things and we can get the same result. We get a different result. And I think arguably, you know, we're not even going to get the same old results, we're just going to get old results. And increasingly, I think we're seeing this across the world, and particularly the election of Donald this week. People were responding in a whole raft of different ways, saying, well, we don't want the old results anymore. We're actually going to go to an extreme to try and find a new way forward and to try and find something different. And I think it's important when we look at, okay, well, how do we take some of that on board and think about what that means for us as a station? Putting some new things in our strategic plan, backing a couple of different initiatives, that we acknowledge the baseline that we're working with. And I think this is it. When asked, would you rather work for change or just complain, 81% of people said, do I have to pick? This is hard. Right? We don't really want to intellectually entertain the idea that we have to change, let alone actually get out there and do it differently. And so we need to think about, okay, well, irrespective of whether that's us and the context directly internally within our station, whether we're trying to create a new partnership and drive a new way forward that can support us commercially in a way that we haven't before, so we're needing to get a partner to think differently, or if we're trying to engage our audience in a different way. We've got to be understanding oftentimes that's where we're starting when it comes to change. And one of the things I think is really powerful, one of the greatest tools in our arsenal is understanding this, that for really, if we were characterising communication and leadership during the industrial age, it tended to work like this. It'd start with the what the station did, what this program was about, what the volunteer role did, you name it, what. And maybe if we got licensed to do it and a bit more time, we'd get into some of the how we're actually going to bring that to life, how the program was going to deliver for our community in a way that had never been done before. But importantly, we really, really rarely ever got to the why. And the reason the why matters so much is it's because it's the part of the equation that flicks on the limbic component of our brains. And that's the part that drives human behaviour and drives motivation. So when we're trying to get extra mile effort out of our volunteers, or we're trying to recruit new people into our station, get them involved, get them participating, we'd better make sure that they can touch, see and feel a why. When we're thinking about how we get someone who's used to us working this way to head over here and go like that, do something differently, that involves willpower, that exerts energy. We need that seesaw to be balanced by motivation. We need to make sure that they can touch, see and feel the why. One of the things I love about this sector is you're people that wear your why on your sleeve. You know, you have such passion for what you do and such enormous purpose. And to that end, I want you to turn to the person next to you, just 30 seconds each, share with them why it is that you get involved, you first got involved and still to this day get involved in community radio. Go for it. Swap over if you haven't already. Swap over. All right, let's bring it back in. Thank you. That was awesome. I love watching the room as you start discussing questions like that, because the animation on your faces, the smiles, the expressions, it just lights the place up. Can people just yell out a couple of things that anyone shared with either their partner or their partner shared with them in that exercise? What were some of the whys? What'd you have? Engagement. Awesome. Community change, great. Because it was illegal not to, right? That's interesting. Okay, each to their own. What else have we got? Yeah. Democracy, cool. So the importance of lots of different voices. Music. What's that? Chance to learn, awesome. Yeah, up the back. Getting new music out there. Yeah, there's clearly a very big passion for music in this room. That was demonstrated. Yep. Camaraderie, wicked, cool. Anything else? Yeah, passionately. Storytelling. Sharing ideas, awesome. Providing a voice. So many great reasons why. That it's not only absolutely so important, the work that you have done, but that this community radio continues to hold the important space and continues to grow the space that it occupies in this country. And really what I want us to think about today, I mean, as I said, you're a sector that do, I think, wear this on your heart. But as we think about how we communicate individually, collectively in our teams, as a station when we're actually public facing, be that going to commercial partners, be that going out to our community, how is it that we can challenge ourselves to lead more with the why? And really what I want to explore quickly is the organisation that taught me that. Who knows these guys? Yeah, okay, pretty well everyone. In fact, given the presence of these radio stations around the country, you probably know your Rotary clubs very well. So Rotary was an organisation that provided me with some funding to go start a microfinance project in Kenya. And when I came back to Australia, I was presenting, and I say this as a loving Rotarian, but Rotarians only approach you one way. They accost you. And they come up to you and they say, "Why aren't you a member of our Rotary Club yet?" And at 20, when they said that to me, I took a step back and went, "Oh, I don't know that I belong in Rotary." Because even if I spoke to most of you, it was probably the thing your dad and his mates did, right? It was kind of the image that I had in my head a little bit. They said, "No, we're doing Rotary differently. You should come, you should check it out." I went, "All right, don't knock it till you try it." So I went along to this Rotary meeting, and like you, they had an unbelievable why. They played this video that showed that they were this close to eradicating polio, and they worked in almost every pocket of disadvantage across the country. And they put this stat up. And if we stop it there, this is a really awesome success moment. And this goes to the point that we started talking about earlier of what are we measuring? What are we making sure that we've got our finger on the pulse of? Because this headline stat is awesome. That's the world's largest community service organisation. But it's so important, particularly as times are really dramatically changing around us, that we're watching what's under the surface as well. And we're tracking things that aren't just the headline. Because here's what's below. Only 2% of their members are under 30 and only 12% are women. When we think about that shift that's going to happen in the demographic at large over the next decade, 2 decades, that's an organisation that unfortunately won't exist. If they can't find a way of positioning differently and being able to engage a broader audience, a new generation, people of different backgrounds and perspectives. And so the other thing you'll know about Rotary is when you make, can I call it the mistake, putting your hand up to get involved, this kind of happens overnight, right? So about 6 months later, I found myself as the world's youngest ever Rotary president, leading a club that was hell-bent on proving that Rotary could be structured differently and in a way that could engage women and could engage young people. Now, I hope you haven't ever felt like this in your own leadership journey to date, but I got about 3 months into this role and this is what my landscape felt like, I swear to you. Everything felt difficult, everything felt like an absolute uphill slog, and there was a real struggle to be able to get any kind of permanent traction, to be able to really drive engagement. And so I went looking for who is it that's done a really good job of being able to engage people differently to get a result. And I was reached out to and was absolutely blown away by this year's Australian of the Year, then the Chief of the Army, who I've been fortunate to work a bit with now, who had tripled the number of women in leadership in the Army. And so I wrote to him and told him what I was doing at Rotary and said, "Is there any chance we could swap notes?" And such is the nature of Lieutenant General Morrison, he said, "Yeah, come and have lunch." So in arguably the most intimidating lunch setting of my life, I sat down opposite the Chief of the Army, but he shared with me one of the single best insights I've ever had into how to drive engagement and get the buy-in of people who might not have otherwise been engaged. I said, "What was the single most important thing that you did to get traction with this initiative?" And he said, "The single most important thing that I did was I made sure that every single person in my organisation could see their why in my why. They could see their why in my why." He said, "Let me explain what I mean by that. For as long as this was a thing we could do, we should do, we ought to do, we'd maybe be lucky to get one step forward, but we would just as readily hop 2 back. The moment I could create a nexus between this initiative and mission safety, this initiative and your ability to get promoted, this initiative and the fact I don't even want you in my army if you're not on board with what we're doing here. That was the moment we started to get real traction and momentum behind what we were doing. Warren Buffett says this great line all the time. He says, "It's simple, but it's not easy." And I think it's really the easy part of the equation as leaders is to assume kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to why. And yet even when we opened up that conversation in this room, in the space of about 45 seconds, we had about 15 different reasons why. And so it's so important for us to be thinking about what's the why for the people that I'm seeking to engage here. What's going to get them engaged, and how am I making sure that I'm doing that within a 4-minute engagement window when I'm talking to them, that I'm leading with their why up front. I think there's a couple of things to talk about here too, and I hope your organisational chart doesn't look like this. I've been in a few that do, believe you me. But there's two important contexts we need to understand the power of the why in, because sometimes, does anyone know any one of these individuals? Yeah, that was a resounding yes. Okay, right. And we can see down the bottom here that the manager of new growth ideas can often be vacant, right? So we've got all that counterweight and not too much heading in our direction. But I think it's really, really important because all of these are great examples of the blocks that we're often contending with change. And one of the things we've got to be able to do is meet the people who've got that particular block and work out a why that's going to get them through it. Because quite often those blocks are a manifestation of a fear or a concern or a worry, of their relevance, of the increased workload, of the ability for it to be successful. We've got to find ways of being able to communicate and get through a why there. One of the other things I think is important, quite often these people are the ones that will sit us in the frustration and depression part of the curve. This is one of the best tools that I use when I'm working with organisations in change management, to map all of our relevant stakeholders across it and think about, okay, where are we at? Who's out the other side, already on board charging for us? And who is it that's still clinging on to the way that we've done things? And we know that people respond to change differently. I mean, there'll be people in this room that when that new iPhone comes out, you are going to camp overnight at the Apple store. So you can be one of the first 20 people to have your hands on that precious thing. And there'll be some of you who are like almost giving your Nokia flip phone CPR, trying to keep that thing alive. God forbid that it should die, right? So we know that this is a natural part of the way that we work and operate. The thing we've got to be prepared for is that area there. We've got to make sure that anyone who's got influence within our organisation, anyone we have to get on board for things to work and to stick and succeed, we've got to meet them at that moment and we've got to help them find their why. And we've got to do that by seeking to understand from their perspective, because as we saw, we've got so many different perspectives in this room. So I want to give you an example of how horribly wrong this can go. And I want to do it by talking to you about if I was giving a gong for epic fail in 2015, who I'd give the gold medal gong to. Who remembers the Your Taxis campaign? A few nods, some of you who don't, so I'll give you a quick bit of backstory. So we know that Uber versus taxis is into about World War III, round 10, across the country. And so the taxi industry went, you know what we need to do? We need to win back the people. We've lost the people. So they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars with a marketing agency, briefed them up. These guys came back to them and said, guys, we've got it. We have worked it out. Do you know what we need to do? We've decided. Genius campaign. We just need to get people on social media sharing their taxi stories. That'll do it. That'll be a ripper. Reaction in the room suggests we know where this is going, right? Because they had an assumption that they were going to be met. The way that they viewed themselves was the way that their audience viewed them. Let's have a quick look at a couple of the tweets that flooded social media in the first 24 hours. It smelled like a Wookiee's armpit. Hashtag your taxis. My personal favourite, this one here. Driver arrived on time in a clean car and even chose a way home that avoided traffic. Wait, sorry, that was actually Uber. Hashtag awkward, right? But this is an example of how easy it is to get it wrong, how easy is it for us to assume something about our audience, assume something about the community that we're seeking to engage, and oftentimes that we believe that we're engaging. And if they'd come and spoken to you, if they'd focus grouped this room, they wouldn't have had this error. I mean, this trended internationally for 3 days, despite the fact they pulled the campaign at the 24-hour mark. So this was an example of a really horrible day out for the taxi industry. But I think it's an important reminder for us of how easy it is for us to make assumptions or to transfer that why onto an audience, and the importance of making sure that we check that before we do that. So there are three things when it comes to this younger audience, when it comes to things that they are not paying, so free services that are not exchanging value for, in the sense of paying a monetary value for. that seem to be the continual call-outs across the surveys we're doing on them. Number one is that purpose piece, and again, that's something that's such a great calling card. And the reason I'm sharing these are things that perhaps in the campaigns that you're seeking to put out there, or the content you're putting in front of younger audiences or putting in front of younger volunteers, these are perhaps things to emphasise in your messaging that you may not have done before. Number one, purpose. It's a great strength of this industry. When all the millennial surveys that are done, 83% of these guys, they want to be working for organisations that believe in a footprint bigger than the bottom line, let alone this piece around volunteering. So it's an enormous attraction to be part of an organisation that's purposeful. So understanding the importance of community radio, why that matters, so that's something we've got to be able to get across really succinctly and articulately so they can engage with it, grasp it and go, yeah, I want on that bandwagon, absolutely. Convenience. This is something we talked about with the engagement piece. We're seeing a shift to handheld devices. We're seeing a shift to on-demand streaming. They want the ability to listen when they want. And we're seeing this across all sort of media. You know, even increasingly the TV services moving stuff to the iPad applications and digital where you can watch at your convenience. So how do we think about that from a resourcing standpoint? How does that change the way we produce or stockpile our content so that it can be accessed in that sort of way at convenience? And finally, brand. And brand's an interesting one, but increasingly with this younger generation, we see a want for an association. This comes with that whole social identity and the fact that they are often are places for the sake of being seen places. They see the things that they buy, engage, and put their time and energy to as extensions of themselves. And so they want a brand identity that they want to associate with too. They want something that's cool, but that is purposeful. And those three things wrapped in together make a really sweet nexus for a powerful and effective why for engaging this generation. I want to talk a little bit about how it is we can open up some of that. This is one of my favourite Dilbert cartoons. Before I make my decision, I'd like to ask for your opinions. It's supposed to make you feel engaged. And you actually plan to listen to us? Well, I'm hoping it'll look that way on the outside. And that's a little bit of the view of what engagement is sometimes. When I think about engagement, I think about how is it that we actually truly involve people in the design of what it is that we do. So if we've got the why right, we've been able to position why it is we do what we do and get that to match for people. Part of it is then around how do we work with them to co-create, design and engage through the process of what does that manifest as. And continuing the Rotary story, that was a big part of our journey there. We went out to people and we said, what do you think when we say Rotary? They said, is that charity thing? Is that the thing the old people do? We had a very positive association with Bunnings car park sausage sizzles. It's a real win for us, right? Outside of that, we were kind of pulling at straws. But in the same conversation, we said to them, okay, if you're giving us 90 minutes of your week, what do you want in return? Which was a challenging question for a lot of our experienced Rotarians, because it should be enough to just contribute. We should just have that altruism where people want to get involved in Rotary. And the thing I would have to try and explain is, yeah, but the landscape is so different. There's 650,000 non-profit organisations in Australia now. When Rotary started 110 years ago, the landscape was pretty different. If you wanted to volunteer and contribute and you're a certain type of person, Rotary was the vehicle. Now there's this whole multitude of places that they can choose to get that from. And so the challenge we need to keep asking ourselves is why you? And the stronger you can articulate that why to them, the more effective your engagement will be. And so they told us, they said, we want to do, we don't want to talk about it. We want the ability to have leadership development and project experience. We want to be mentored. We'd really love if we could have some uplifting speakers so we walk away from meetings feeling energised and fired up. And so we said, okay, if we promise we're going to take all this on board and try and do something about it, will you come back and give us another go in 3 months? 3 months later, 85% of the people who came back signed up on the spot, because there was a correlation between what they said and the fact that we did it. We'd listened. It hadn't been that engagement where it's like, oh yeah, I'm hoping it'll look like we listened. It was engagement where we went, no, we're actually going to design stuff around what it is that you've told us that you want. Because I think about it like this, like I think about true engagement as the difference between the role of a chicken and a pig in your breakfast this morning, right? You had some scrambled eggs and some bacon for breakfast. One of them was involved, the other was committed, right? So what we're looking at when we're talking about engagement is we're talking about how do we get the commitment. That's that end of the spectrum that we were looking at before. And how we do that, one of the greatest tools in our arsenal is the active involvement of people in designing what it is that we deliver. The ability, this is a sector that lives and breathes on sharing people's voices. It's so important that we meaningfully involve their voice in actually how it is that we go about doing that. So not just meeting the community's need for voice, but how it is that we go about delivering that internally. One of the big ways I'm seeing a lot of organisations challenge themselves to reframe this at the moment is through flipping mentoring on its head. Mentoring traditionally was the person who'd been in the industry for a really long time and the person who'd been in 5 minutes. And that one-way exchange where they'd help out the person that had been in for a little period of time. Increasingly what we're seeing all across the business community in particular is what they're calling reverse or reciprocal mentoring. So I chat to the chairman of Alcoa about this a couple of weeks ago. Alan's been in business for decades, and yet he was raving to me about his 21-year-old mentor who's teaching him how to use Twitter. He did use a few wrong words. He called them twits instead of tweets, but we're getting there. Who's talking to him all about the graduate experience at the company, putting on his radar all these exciting new business models and applications that he's using that are changing the way that he lives and works. And he said, it's making me a better chairman. There's this great line that says you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time around. And I think one of the big challenges when we think about the makeup and our baseline as an organisation, if we're looking at our membership profile, if we're looking at our audience profile, I challenge us to think about the diversity of the 5 people that we spend the most time around. Individually, just as much as collectively. Who are your sounding boards that you're putting new ideas in front of? Is there the opportunity to ask someone of a completely different background? I'm not even just talking about age here, I'm talking any sort of different reference point, totally different industry, totally different socioeconomic background, cultural background, you name it. Is there the opportunity to ask them out to sit down and have a conversation? One of my mentors, his name's Virgil, so you know he's got to be wise. Virgil said this great thing once. He said, how long does it take to learn from someone's lifetime of experience? Lunch. What, lunch? I can do a lot of lunch. I can do a lot of coffee. It's that idea that learning is that accessible. Are we prepared to put ourselves out there and make that ask of someone in our community who could give us a totally different sounding board? And at the same time, if we're in the position of being the person that puts the meeting invites for the station meetings out, if we're in the position of being the people that put the broadcast schedules together for who it is that's going to provide content, can we challenge ourselves to invite some different people to that conversation and open up mentoring, exchanges, conversations that we might not otherwise have been privy to in order to start a very different form of community engagement and engage a new and different audience. Okay, one final thing I want to talk about. How does this all come to life? I think one of the big things that can happen when we look at some of the trends that we've talked about this morning is we can kind of sit there almost a little bit paralysed going, geez, this is huge. How do we start? What does taking a step towards any of this look like? And over and over again, working on these sorts of projects with everything from elite sporting organisations to big business, the big breakdown I see is when we try and load too much on the plate. Because you're all busy people. I know so many of you are doing this in an entirely voluntary capacity. You've got work, you've got family, you've got so many commitments. And so to come in and say, here's this giant new piece of work we need to do, off you go, isn't easy. Even if you want that to succeed, it can sometimes be very difficult to pull it off. So I want to finish by a couple of quick thoughts on how we can help ourselves position a bit more effectively to succeed. The first sounds a little counterintuitive. It's this idea of starting before we're ready. And the reason I put that out there is my observation continually is that we're almost waiting for what I call the mirage of readiness, which is this magical, mystical state that we think we can see. It's not here, but it's a little bit further ahead, where all the ducks line up, where everything's going to be perfect. That'll be the time where we can go for it. We need 12 more months, we need X more in the budget, we need this, this and this and this before we can do it. And the challenge, we've looked at it this morning, the pace of change that we're dealing with, we don't get the luxury of leading instability anymore. We're going to have to learn to operate in this environment that's continually changing on us, and when we're not going to arrive at this magical, stable state. So we've actually got to challenge ourselves to start before we're ready. And what I mean by that is challenge us to believe that ready's now. And it's not about waiting for that magical set of circumstances. It's actually more valuable to start than it is to wait for the start, to wait for that state of readiness. So how is it that in this moment, at the next board meeting, next week when you're back at the station, you can think about something that we've talked about today And even if it is as simple as convening a meeting with completely different people at the table and opening up a conversation on what you can do differently. How do you start now? The second thing that's really, really important is that we minimise the distance between 2 points. And what I mean by that is we've got to make it seem doable and achievable. It's like if I dumped a 10,000 piece puzzle in front of you and said, off you go, do it. Most of you would probably, maybe pull the middle finger at me and wander out of the room. But if we broke it down and going, okay, let's just get the little corner here nailed first, and then we'll find all the straight pieces and we'll do the outline, and we can make these little tangible steps that it becomes doable, it becomes easier. One of the challenges being if we put too much on the plate, it becomes overwhelmingly large. So we've got to think about what's the low-hanging fruit and the low-hanging ideas that we can do first. What are the things, because we know nothing builds momentum like results. What are the easy things that we know we can get engagement with? Is it as simple as bringing some new people in and starting up social media channels that we haven't done before? Is it, as I said, convening a different group of people together and having some different conversations? Is it thinking about how you change your messaging on the station so you're potentially more effective with how it is you position your why and you get a whole lot of new eyeballs looking at you and ears interested in listening to you? Whatever it is, we need to make sure that we're breaking things down. One of my big tips on that as an individual is I've developed a tool called 24/7-1. And the reason I use this is because quite often I think when we write a goal or a strategic plan, it's very hard to actually make movement towards that. It can kind of sit there as this giant objective and we go, yeah, but how do we start? So the idea of 24/7-1 is within 24 hours, you have to take an initial little action step. Something simple. Could be firing off an email, could be doing some research on Google. Whatever it is, you're doing something in line with achieving or pursuing that goal or objective. Within 7 days, you're doing something slightly bigger than that. Might be that you're convening a meeting. Might be that you draft some of that new language that you want to have a go at. Might be that you open up a new conversation with your listeners and actually invite their feedback and involvement in a way that you haven't done before. And finally, within 1 month, you do something even larger than that. You're prepared to have a go. Maybe you're pitching to your board a new initiative that you can see yourselves taking forward in the next 12 months. Or you're sitting down with someone that could be a new commercial partner and you've really thought about their why and you're going about a pitch in a way that you've never gone about it before. And then you take all the learning, all the advancement that you've made over the course of that 24/7-1 and you roll it into the next month and you go again. It's one of those things that makes it doable because you're breaking it into bite-sized chunks that we can all fit in alongside business as usual. And it makes it really easy to progress towards a major objective while just taking these smaller bite-sized steps. The final thing is increasing our perceived capability. And that really goes to that heart around picking the things that we believe we can get the runs on the board with, doing the stuff that we can show ourselves, oh wow, we're capable of this. You know, this isn't so overwhelming. I think change often becomes a dirty word because we get fatigued by the idea of it, right? And we look at it and we go, oh my God, that's massive, can we pull that off? So we need to look for examples of where's this happening around Australia, where's this happening around the world. Let that encourage us that this is possible. Let's pick and go about doing this initiative in a way where we know we're likely to be able to succeed. I want to give you one final thought on this roadmap piece. I want to share you a very quick story of a girl that really inspires me when it comes to this. She's a little girl on my left here and her name's Annie. And I met Annie in 2013 when the Governor of WA and I launched a program called Kids Who Give in WA, which was a program designed to get under 12-year-olds contributing to the community, starting all sorts of impact projects. We visited about 85 primary schools that year. And at this particular primary school, the principal had kind of a cool idea. 2 weeks before we arrived, he gave Annie $10. And he said to Annie, Annie, I want you to do something with this $10, and in 2 weeks' time, I want you to come back and tell the whole school assembly about it. Cool. If you're anything like me, you probably naturally just guess at what Annie might have done. You go, well, I don't know, maybe she put it in a collection tin for a cause that she really believed in. Or maybe she bought $10 worth of food and gave it to a local homeless person. But Annie was unbelievably creative. They would have been great things to do, but she really thought outside the box. She took her $10, put them in one of those red box DVD rental machines, got out 2 DVDs, put it on in 2 separate halls of the school, charged entry, this enterprising 10-and-a-half-year-old, and turned $10 into $365. And 2 weeks later, that was the story that she was telling at the school assembly, which was amazing. And there's two reasons I share that. One, because I'm ashamed to admit, even in telling that story, I unconsciously doubted Annie's ability to be that creative and had that sort of impact. And I think that is something we can readily do. It's quite easy for us to go, oh yeah, but as if the answer could come from there, as if they'd know about how to do this or be able to come up with a different sort of solution. And yet the thing that we know in this time that we're in is that great answers and ideas can come from anywhere. And you probably hear that on the other end of phone lines and microphones across our country week in, week out. But I think it's really important that we're mindful of that in how we go about delivering on what we do. The second thing I think is really important is this goes to the heart of challenging us to start before we're ready. When I get overawed by the fact, we need to get X amount from this partner or from the government to be able to do this, I challenge myself always to go, what's our equivalent of $10 in 2 weeks? How do we give ourselves a little bit of resourcing and a little bit of time and go about having a crack at this? Go on the learning journey, proof up the concept, start small, see if there's something in it, and then we can grow it from there. Because the impact that had, imagine if Annie had waited until she had $1,000, because $10 wasn't really going to do anything for the community, was it? But she didn't have that doubt or that layer to the way that she was viewing things, and she was able to have an enormous impact as a result. So really what I wanted to do today was draw attention to some of the change, the trends and the transformation that's occurring in the world around us, and draw, I guess, some conclusions as well to some of the things that we're seeing and how that is impacting radio and how that might impact radio. And I think really the importance of these conversations is it creates that awareness. What these conversations are valuable for is the baseline it gives us, and the opportunity in this space, particularly amongst colleagues and people that are working in a similar space full of great ideas, to go, okay, how do we respond to that? What do we do? How do we take that on board and make that real and relevant and apply it for where we are right now? Big things from my point of view is making sure you're thinking about that why. Leading with that from a communication standpoint, understanding it's as important that that's your passive digital engagement just as much as it's everything that's coming over the airwaves at them. And that it's so important we don't make assumptions about a one-size-fits-all why, and that we seek to understand who it is that we're trying to engage in that conversation. I think it's really, really important as well that we're making sure we're actively engaging the people that we're seeking to serve or work with. That could be our partners too, in the design of how it is we go about putting things together, making sure that we're involving and participating in them. I should say, by the time I'd finished as Rotary President, we'd grown to be the second largest Rotary club in Australia and to lead the world out of all 34,000 clubs in the concentration of young people we had in membership. We only did that because we co-designed with the community we sought to serve. And finally, that piece around really breaking our roadmap down, making sure we're not putting too much up front, taking the low-hanging fruit, but most importantly, challenging ourselves to start before we're ready, to go now, $10 in 2 weeks. I wish you every success, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you do. Cheers.